In 1899 in New York, Dr. Alexander teaches mechanics and engineering at Columbia University. He's obsessed with science and innovation, but his ramble about Einstein, solar power, and city plans isn't taken seriously. This obsession distracts him a lot from his other responsibilities, and he often forgets things, like the fact tonight he's supposed to meet his girlfriend at the park. After his friend reminds him of the date, Alexander rushes to the park and remembers he was also supposed to buy flowers, but he immediately gets distracted by another innovation, a horseless carriage. When the driver accidentally starts it, Alexander grabs the brake and stops it just in time. Then he runs to meet his girlfriend Emma and takes her on a walk through the park, apologizing for the lack of flowers but offering something much better instead, a marriage proposal. Emma says yes, and Alexander puts a beautiful ring with her birthstone on her finger. Suddenly the sweet moment is interrupted by an armed thief, who takes Alexander's wallet and tries to go for the ring too. Alexander tries to stop him, and in the struggle, the gun accidentally shoots Emma. As the thief runs, Alexander holds Emma close as she dies in his arms. For the next 4 years, Alexander is depressed and does nothing but work all day long, convinced that he can bring Emma back. His friends worry about him, but he ignores their concerns. One day, Alexander finally cleans up and reveals he's finished his latest invention, a time machine. He sits on it and immediately activates it, traveling back to the night of Emma's death. After a bright light surrounds him, he appears back in the park and sees Emma. He's missed her so much that he kisses her even though they're in public, then he drags her out of the park to avoid the thief. They take a carriage to go downtown and Emma reminds him he promised flowers, so Alexander enters a shop to buy them. At that moment, the horseless carriage causes an accident on the street and Alexander has to watch Emma die again. Later at the morgue, Alexander realizes that if he keeps going back he'll just see Emma die over and over, so instead he should travel to the future to see if advanced science can change the past. Once he returns to the time machine, Alexander starts it up and chooses to go to the future. As the machine glows again, he watches everything around him change, from the plants on his building to the clothing in the shops. Suddenly he accidentally drops the necklace with Emma's picture and fails to retrieve it, so the necklace also disappears through time. Eventually he makes it to the year 2030, and Alexander is amazed by the modern apartment buildings and screens everywhere. After a random person calls his suit retro, he goes to the New York Public Library, where he discovers books are relics that mustn't be touched. There are also a set of screens and a giant sphere battery that powers them to project Vox, a holographic librarian. Vox has access to every database on Earth, so Alexander asks him why he can't change the past, but Vox just says time traveling simply isn't possible and begins listing sci-fi works to the point he sings the soundtrack of famous movies. A frustrated Alexander returns to his time machine to go further into the future, but suddenly he feels some shaking and stops at the year 2037. He's shocked to see that the whole city has been destroyed and soon he's found by soldiers who want to help him evacuate because the moon is breaking up. Alexander looks up to confirm this disturbing claim, but at that moment something explodes and the ground starts cracking, giving him the chance to return to the machine. Unfortunately an earthquake hits the machine and he falls unconscious, so the time trip keeps going for thousands of years. Earth changes around Alexander, going through dozens of different climates and environments that include a whole new ice age. Eventually Alexander wakes up and stops the machine to discover he's ended up in the year 800-2701 before he faints again. Sometime later, Alexander is dreaming about Emma while a mysterious person takes care of his wounds. When he finally wakes up, he sees a child called Kaylin watching him, but Alexander can't understand the language he speaks. Kaylin runs away and Alexander follows him, only to discover he's in a village built on a canyon. Then Kaylin yells a few words and all the villagers come to check on him, but the only one that can speak English is Mara, the woman that had been taking care of him and Kaylin's sister. The villagers wonder if they should throw Alexander into the river, so he tries to explain he comes from the past, but Mara translates it into Alexander being a wandering idiot that hit his head. Suddenly they hear a horn announcing it's time for bed, so Alexander goes with Mara and Kaylin to stay the night with them. He also shares some stories with Kaylin about the big city and gifts him his pocket watch. After Kaylin falls asleep, Mara explains that their parents are dead. Then Alexander takes a look outside and sees the broken moon, thinking he's come too far. Later that night, Alexander dreams about a white face calling his name followed by a giant monster head roaring. He wakes up quite startled and discovers Kaylin is also having a nightmare while repeating the word Morlock. Mara quickly calms him down and notices that the pocket watch is missing. When Alexander asks about the nightmare, Mara says they all see the same dream, but refuses to explain what Morlock means. The next day, Mara shows Alexander the collection of building pieces they've collected from around the land. It's thanks to these pieces that they've been able to keep English around, and Mara has been trying her best to preserve the old culture by teaching others. On their way back, Alexander wonders why he hasn't seen old people, so Mara says they're all dead without explaining why. The rest of the villagers are currently working in the field with the help of windmills, but Mara drags Alexander away to show him where his time machine is. While Alexander gets the machine ready, Mara asks him to take Kaylin with him. Before she can explain why, she hears a noise and runs away to find her brother. Alexander follows her and discovers that the Morlocks are monstrous beings that hunt down the villagers. This is why there aren't any old people, they aren't fast enough to escape. The villagers panic and run as fast as possible as the Morlocks use darts to knock them down. While Mara is looking for Kaylin, she gets hit by a dart too and Alexander rushes to remove it, realizing it has a very smelly substance on it. The villagers try to make it to the river to escape on their boats, but the way is blocked when bigger Morlocks start coming out of the ground. As the people try to find a safe direction to run, these new Morlocks grab the villagers that were hit by the darts and tie them up to then take them away by sinking back into the ground. Suddenly Kaylin yells for help because he's been hit too and a Morlock is coming for him. Mara wants to save him, but Alexander tells her to stay and he goes instead. He pushes the Morlock down just in time, and while Kaylin runs, Alexander gets the creature with a tool then starts running in the opposite direction. The Morlock chases after Alexander, and when it jumps, Alexander dodges it, which causes the monster to roll into the jungle. Then Alexander climbs one of the windmills, and when the Morlock comes back and grabs his legs, Alexander kicks it until it falls. However, the Morlock doesn't give up and quickly climbs the windmill until it reaches Alexander at the top, causing them to struggle against each other until they fall together to the ground. The Morlock grabs Alexander by the neck, ready to kill, but Kaylin shows up and stops him with a torch. At that moment they hear Mara screaming, so the Morlock sinks back into the ground while Alexander and Kaylin run back only to discover Mara is being taken away. Alexander rushes to dig into the sand to find the hole to no avail. Upset and frustrated, he asks the villagers why they don't fight back, and one of them explains this is just how their world works, those who fight back are simply taken first. Then Alexander asks Kaylin where people are taken, but the child answers they aren't supposed to talk about the place where the ghosts are. Later in the evening, Kaylin sneaks out of the village to take Alexander to that place, which turns out to be an old underground cave. Alexander is shocked to discover these are the ruins of the New York Library, and while the books are crumbling into ashes, the battery is still intact. This allows Vox to appear again, and he even remembers Alexander. He explains that humans have evolved into two different species, the villagers that live above and the Morlocks that live underground. Vox once met a villager who managed to escape. Apparently this guy came from the jungle in the east and Alexander only has to follow the breathing to find it. Kaylin and Alexander immediately take off and follow the breathing sound through the jungle until they find the giant head from their dreams, which is supposed to keep people away. Alexander tells Kaylin to return to the village and light a fire, that way he can find the way back after rescuing Mara. Before leaving, Kaylin tells him the watch is missing. Then Alexander enters the statue's mouth only to suddenly slip and fall, saving himself at the last second. He holds tightly while a bunch of bats flies very close to him, then he slowly climbs down until he finds some machinery that indicates he's on the right path. Suddenly Alexander sees a few Morlocks walking by, so he hides behind a wall and sneaks around carefully until he finds the whole group working together. Alexander goes down an empty corridor and finds a pile of villager clothes that includes Mara's necklace, but he also sees a bunch of disturbing tools. As he walks back in shock, he accidentally falls into a pit filled with skeletons that confirm his suspicions. The Morlocks hunt the villagers for food. At that moment a Morlock finds him and immediately locks him away. In this new room, Alexander finds Mara in a cage, but she seems to be unresponsive. When Alexander turns around, he sees a strange pale man known as the Uber Morlock, the leader of his race and the pale face for the dreams. He explains that after the moon fell, Earth couldn't sustain humans anymore. Some people managed to survive above, but the rest escaped underground. They spent so many centuries down there that when they tried to come out again, the sun hurt them, so in the end they bred themselves into different castes. Some of them have good eyes and ears, and others have big muscles. The Uber Morlock belongs to the caste that expanded the cerebral abilities, so he's able to see and control others' thoughts. He controls the other Morlocks so they won't overconsume and exhaust the food supply, and controls the villagers to use them as food. Sometimes he also controls their women to use them as breeding vessels, which is his plan for Mara. A furious Alexander says it's a corruption of every natural law, but Uber Morlock points out natural evolution did this and the unnatural thing is actually time travel. Then he grabs Alexander by his neck and sees into his mind before letting him go into a mental image of what he could have had. Alexander finds himself in his original home, surrounded by successful inventions and his wife Emma with a couple of kids. However, the illusion quickly goes away and Uber Morlock explains why the past can't be changed. Alexander built the time machine because Emma died, so if she lives, then the machine isn't made and Alexander can't use it to go save her in the first place. At that moment Uber Morlock makes the machine appear and tells Alexander to go since he has his answer. Alexander sits in the machine, but before leaving, he asks Uber Morlock for the missing watch. When the guy comes closer to give it to him, Alexander grabs him, activates the machine, and starts fighting him. Alexander's hits aren't strong enough to hurt a strong creature like Uber Morlock, but at least he manages to disarm him when Uber Morlock reveals a knife. Then Alexander is grabbed by the neck again, so he hits the machine to make it lose steam, which hits Uber Morlock on the face and makes him fall. At the last second, Uber Morlock grabs Alexander's neck, but Alexander makes the machine go faster into the future and the hanging monster ages at a great speed until he's nothing but ashes. When Alexander finally stops the machine, he's billions of years in the future and discovers the Morlocks have ended all life on Earth. However, he doesn't give up. He goes back and saves Mara from the cage, then he connects the time machine to the watch and activates it, blinding the Morlocks that are coming for them. Alexander and Mara lock the door behind them and run away until they make it to the main room, where Alexander is hit by a dart. Mara knocks down the attacking Morlock, but the noise alerts the other ones, who start chasing them by following the smell of the dart. The duo runs fast through the corridor and Alexander throws his jacket away to distract the Morlocks with the smell while they start climbing out of the cave. At that moment, the pocket watch causes the machine to malfunction and it suddenly explodes, killing every Morlock in the cave. The duo is saved just in time by the villagers brought by Kalen, and together they move away right before the giant head also explodes, sending a damaging wave through all the tunnels. Alexander isn't sad to have lost the machine because he's found a new home here, and he gets together with Mara. Sometime later, Alexander brings Vox out of the cave so he can educate the village kids, then he takes Mara and Kalen to see the spot where his house used to be. At the same time in the present, Alexander's friends are a bit worried that he's been missing for a week, but at the same time they're glad if it means he's finally found happiness. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.